Most of us treat having a drink as a casual, modern ritual. You grab a beer, sip some wine, and forget about it. But the act of consuming alcohol is actually one of the oldest human behaviors on record. It predates writing, math, and even permanent shelter. For decades, historians mapped out a very clear, sequential timeline of human progress. This flowchart shows the standard historical model. First, humans survived as nomadic hunter-gatherers. Then, we invented agriculture. That gave us a surplus of grain, which let us bake bread, which led to permanent cities. Only after all that did we finally discover how to brew alcohol. That final note on the right treats drinking as an accidental luxury. The assumption was that you needed a massive, settled society before anyone had the spare time and surplus crops to experiment with fermentation. Then, in 2018, archaeologists working inside the 13,000-year-old Rakafet cave along the Israeli coast found a glaring anomaly. The Natufian people who used this cave had never planted a single crop. Inside the bedrock, researchers discovered carved stone mortars. When they analyzed the residue trapped in those mortars, they found traces of wild wheat and barley that had been intentionally soaked, allowed to germinate, and left to ferment. These people were brewing beer inside a cave. 1,000 years later, prehistoric groups in southeastern Turkey constructed Göbekli Tepe. They carved and arranged massive stone pillars weighing over 10 tons into precise circular formations. And mixed in with this immense architecture, excavators found enormous stone vats containing the chemical traces of fermented grain. The groups at both of these sites were strictly nomadic hunter-gatherers. They hunted wild game and collected wild grains by hand. They had no idea how to farm. Yet they were organizing massive amounts of labor and engineering complex sites specifically to brew beer. To understand why a wandering tribe would put so much energy into making drinks, we have to rewind the clock roughly 10 million years and look at the forest floors of prehistoric Africa. When a piece of wild fruit drops from a tree and sits on the ground, a natural chemical reaction begins. Wild yeast penetrates the skin, breaking down the natural sugars inside. This process, fermentation, causes the fruit to soften and produce small amounts of ethanol. According to a biological framework known as the Drunken Monkey hypothesis, early primates would forage for this fallen, overripe fruit. As they ate, the trace amounts of ethanol inside made them feel mildly intoxicated. But it was the caloric payoff that really mattered. The scent of ethanol signaled a highly concentrated, energy-dense food source. Over millions of years of evolution, hominids who actively tracked down that scent survived and passed down their genes, training our ancestors to actively seek out the taste of alcohol. By the time modern humans finally walked the earth, the biological craving for alcohol was hardwired into our DNA. We were programmed to want it millions of years before we ever figured out how to make it ourselves. That hardwired drive explains a lot about the layout of Göbekli Tepe. The current archaeological consensus points away from this 12,000-year-old site being a permanent home. The intricate animal reliefs and enormous brewing vats suggest it was a centralized gathering place for intense ritual and communal feasting. Moving 10-ton rocks up a hill requires immense, coordinated effort from scattered nomadic tribes. The promise of a massive social gathering, heavily fueled by large quantities of alcohol, provided the exact motivational force needed to pull that workforce together. This leads to a leading archaeobotanical theory that inverts our accepted history. Humanity likely did not endure the grueling, back-breaking labor of early agriculture to secure a stable supply of bread. We domesticated plants to secure a reliable supply of beer. This diagram compares the mechanical requirements for the two foods. On the left, bread demands a complex, multi-step sequence: harvesting, threshing, grinding the grain into flour, kneading dough, and managing a hot oven. On the right, beer is exceptionally simple. You soak grain in a vat of water and walk away. The natural yeast in the air handles the fermentation entirely on its own. Early farming was miserable, repetitive work. The immediate, intoxicating, calorie-dense reward of a fermented drink offered a far superior incentive to keep planting seeds than the promise of slightly more accessible grain. By 7000 BCE, in Jiahu, central China, we see exactly how deliberate this process became. Archaeologists recovered pottery jars there, containing the world's oldest confirmed chemical recipe for alcohol. a specific, purposeful blend of rice, honey, and hawthorn herbs. People wandering the landscape didn't accidentally drop seeds and decide to build a town. The desire to systematize alcohol production gave nomadic tribes the final push to domesticate crops, stay in one place, and lay the foundations for permanent settlements. Once humanity put down roots, alcohol evolved from an agricultural incentive into the mechanical engine of massive ancient civilizations, nowhere more visibly than in ancient Egypt. The Egyptian state functioned on a liquid economy. The laborers who hauled limestone blocks to construct the Great Pyramids were paid their daily wages entirely in beer, receiving about 4 to 5 liters a day. This solved a critical public health problem. Drawing raw water directly from the Nile River carried a massive risk of parasites and bacterial infection. The intense heat of the brewing process naturally purified the liquid, making beer a substantially safer hydration source. For a laborer sweating in the desert sun, a daily ration of beer solved multiple biological problems at once. It provided clean hydration, while the thick, unfiltered liquid served as a nutrient-dense meal that kept them physically capable of hauling stone. The state relied on it so heavily that it permeated every level of society. Doctors mixed herbs into beer to prescribe it as medicine for stomach ailments, and priests treated it as a divine gift from the god Osiris, requiring it for temple offerings and burial rituals. The trajectory of human history tracks directly alongside this liquid. Small primates learned to track the scent of rotting fruit for survival. Prehistoric nomads hauled massive stones to brew in the hills of Turkey, and eventually entire empires used it to finance their monuments. Every time you pour a drink today, you are participating in the exact same evolutionary impulse. The cups have changed and the recipes have improved, but the underlying drive to gather and ferment is the reason we built a civilization to drink it in.